apologies if you don't know as much as I'd probably think you may know about crypto. So just stop me where I'm going. But what is Bitcoin?
Bitcoin means just about everything to, depending on who you talk to, it means something different. Bitcoin to me is, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, also say, what is blockchain? But most people know Bitcoin, right?
The way I look at Bitcoin is Bitcoin's like a checking account. It's like the purest checking account. And this is why I actually started buying it, because I started reading around 2015, 16 about the bail-in that happened in Cyprus back in 2013. Essentially what happened was all the banks over-levered, and the IMF came in and said, instead of the government and the European Union bailing out all your banks, we're going to convert all the depositors, which are liabilities to the bank. We're going to like, so if you had savings in the bank, like 100 grand or whatever, no, more than 100 grand, I think it was, depending on the bank and the risk in the bank, they would take in excess of that and they would give you shares of the bank, which are worthless. And they pretty much convert all your liquidity into shares. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't want to leave any of my money in the bank. And that's when I started looking into it. And at the same time, I think it was in 2014, I think I've seen a random tweet from Raoul Pal. And I didn't know who Raoul Pal was at the time, but he said like, oh, Bitcoin might push higher. And I didn't even know what Bitcoin was, but it was trading at $200. And I was saying to my wife, oh, we should buy a little bit, because normally when I buy something that I don't understand, it catches my attention, like a small bit, catches my attention and I learn about it, you know? But I didn't do it at the time because I couldn't find anywhere where I could actually buy it. Anyway, it went all the way up to $20,000 and I was furious. So I was constantly calling it a bubble, frustrated. And then when it started to fall, I started to look into it a little bit more. And what I realized with Bitcoin is it's the purest form of like a bank account or a savings account. So when you put your money in the bank, you're saving in whatever your denomination is. So let's say you've got British pounds, you're saving in pounds. And the problem that I have with that, first and foremost, is the supply the supply of pounds is really dependent on the central bank, right? And whether the government need liquidity, and if the government start fiscal stimulus, the trickle down effect actually increases a lot more. So you end up with more pounds like over time. And Bitcoin has this fixed supply, which is fantastic. So I was like, okay, so the denomination in Bitcoins is better because you can't increase the supply. It's not a centralized system. And then when I started to look into it further, it had all of the aspects that a normal bank would have. So you look at a company like BlockFi, and BlockFi have partnered up with Fidelity. And you can literally go and use your Bitcoin now as collateral against a loan. So you can go to BlockFi. BlockFi will take your Bitcoin and give you a 50% loan to value against that Bitcoin. At the same time, what BlockFi do is they provide liquidity to exchanges and institutions that need Bitcoin. And so they rent that out on a short-term basis. And for renting, let's say you had Bitcoin and BlockFi, they'll pay you an interest on that. So you could put it into a savings account and earn up to 8%, depending on how much Bitcoin you actually have. You can earn up to 8% of Bitcoin on your Bitcoin. And they pay it out in US dollars. And I was thinking to myself, why would I have anything in a checking account when I can own Bitcoin? I can put it over in BlockFi. It'll continue to appreciate because it's reflexive. And I can collect 8% per year. And then what I realized is with Bitcoin is you have to own a piece of the network. So, but I thought I was late in December 2018. It was around 3,700 euros is where it was trading. And I was thinking to myself, I'm dead late here. I felt a little bit nervous because I thought I was overpaying for it. But then when I started to realize, and you break it down, you realize it's addressing in a monetary system that's $240 trillion. Like, what's a fair value for the market cap of Bitcoin, 5 or 10 trillion? And then that's when I started to really invest. And so it's a scaling technology, but it's almost like a bank account. And that's the way I look at it. And eventually, the reason why a lot of people are scared of it is because of the volatility. But what they don't realize is that we're in the adoption phase. This is the early adopter. We're actually moving into the institutional phase. And I would be very confident in saying it'd be very difficult for us to break back below $28,000, $30,000, because if you go back to the 2nd or the 3rd of January, that was the highest inflows of institutional investors. I can't imagine that they're going to allow the price go below what their entry point was. And so moving forward, I think it's a very reflexive trade where people start to realize what Bitcoin actually is. and you have to own a piece of the network. So you're constantly going to drive the price higher. Whereas in your bank account, they just open an account and then they place your funds in there. And so moving forward, yes, it is volatile. It's really volatile, but it's a reflexive trade where you have to own the network. And by more and more people adopting it, it's going to continue to drive the price higher up until a point where it's several $1 trillion in market cap. And then the fluctuations will die down massively. And I would say probably in 10 years, when all that plays out, we're going to be using digital assets more often. Banks are already starting to adopt it because it's easier and more efficient to transfer capital and store capital. But in 10 years, a lot of people will be very comfortable with digital assets. But when the volatility dies out, you're going to see that a lot of people will have Bitcoin savings accounts and Bitcoin current accounts rather than something at your traditional bank. And you're probably going to see some of the traditional banks acquire companies like BlockFi in order to get ahead of the game, or at least to catch up.